Thank you, Sophia. That was very nice, and it's a very good reminder that there is a lot of divine out there that we can all pull from. Well, the title of my talk today is What I Meant to Say Was. Anybody have a moment where you are saying something and in the midst of it you're like, why am I saying this? Or then you get done saying it and you're like, huh? What? Where did that come from? I know I certainly have a very colorful list of these kinds of stories, and it's understandable. We are only human, and even with my whole life with language and speaking, I've always been a very thoughtful speaker, and there's many times before I even speak, I already have it all figured out how I'm going to say it or whatever. And even with that kind of intention, there's times when I just start speaking and this whole diatribe I had in my head, it doesn't come out. And it has to do with the dynamics of situations change. We can plan for conversations, we can plan for things we're going to say, or we cannot be planning for things to say, but in any dynamic situation, our reaction to it often shapes how we speak about it or how we speak with one another. And it's so easy to get caught up in whatever that dynamic is and lose track of our truth self in speaking, or lose track of those thoughts that we had or whatever. And so, again, we can't dismiss this human part of our nature. And I'm not even suggesting that we do, because that's something that we always need to embrace. But where we run into trouble is when we cling on to these memories, to these times where we haven't spoken our best. And we cling to these memories, and this is something that starts to define us, that, oh, we always speak wrong, or the way I said this person, you hold on to it, and you relive these hurts over and over again, and just wishing we would have said something different, and wondering how a situation might be different had we spoken differently. And so what I'm proposing here right off is that it's what we do after these moments that defines us. It's not the memories of it, it's not the memories that we have, but what we do after these moments that truly defines us. And do we make our humanity our virtue, or do we allow this aspect of our humanity to make us a victim? And I'd like to say that our humanity is our virtue and not making us a victim. So about 15 years ago, I read this book, The Four Agreements, by Don Miguel Ruiz. If you've never read this book, I highly recommend it, just because it provides a nice framework of being in this world. And it's a really fun, interesting read. He has a nice way of articulating a lot of different points and aspects of being a human. And the first agreement in this book is called Be Impeccable with Your Word. And I've spent about the last 15 years really kind of embracing a lot of the ideas of this be impeccable with your words. To kind of paraphrase what that agreement is about, Don Miguel Ruiz kind of summarizes it in this way. The word is the most powerful tool you have as a human. It is the tool of magic, but like a sword with two edges, your word can create the most beautiful dream, or your word can destroy everything around you. One edge is the misuse of the word, which creates a living hell. The other edge is the impeccability of the word, which only create beauty, love, and heaven on earth. Depending on how it is used, the word can set you free, or it can enslave you even more than you know. So what makes our words so challenging sometimes? Well, as I said, there's a lot of factors, the dynamics of being with one another, but even within our own selves, we have our fear that seems to be a constant generator of motivation for us in our world. And fear stems from primarily a lot of different ways, but another thing that we get caught up with is our ego, and the ego has many heads, and it can come as the need for approval, the need to be right. Anger gets in our way, sadness gets in our way, not feeling our best, not knowing any better inherited traits. There's sometimes where we act and it's just something that we've learned from our whole life of watching our parents or interacting with our parents. And another big one is a failure to see beyond our own self. When we just are in our own world and we forget that there's another human experience in front of us that we're talking about, and another human experience over here, and all of them are unique and their own. And another way that we get caught up in our words is that we become too impatient or too anxious to speak, and we're not listening to whatever it is in front of us. And so these are all the ways that we can get caught up. And there's a lot, and it's just kind of like, well, how do we not get caught up in that? And that truly is the trick. But I think identifying and knowing that because all these aspects of our human nature are there, that it becomes, it's easier to get caught up in it than not. And so this is how we need to learn to rise above it. I've had a few examples recently, as I said, of times where I haven't spoke my best, and I'll share a couple of those with you just so that can illustrate this point and kind of illustrate the tool that you can do to help yourself move past that. This past week I was sick with the flu, and so I was pretty much down and out, and one day we were changing the sheets on the bed, and the only place that I could go was on the couch in our living room, and with 3 kids, a couch in the living room is not exactly a safe haven of quiet and stillness, especially with a 4-year-old. And my daughter, bless her, she loves me and she loves to be around me, and she constantly comes to wherever I am, and it's a very endearing quality, except for when you're trying to rest and have a few moments of quiet. And one of her favorite things to do in the living room is to come and tear all the cushions off the couch and start jumping around. And so, of course, this day she chose to do that, and I just felt it going on all around me. I'm like, okay, I can just let it go. She's doing her own thing. But then she started crawling over the top of my head, and I could hear my wife just like, Evie, come over here. Just leave Daddy alone. And she kept trying to do it, but she was over my head and back over my head. And finally, I was at a temperature of 103, and I was a little delirious, and I just turned and looked at her, and I'm like, what did I say? It broke my heart to say it, and I'm like, back off! And she was just like that, and I'm like, I need to rest, and I just went on for a few seconds of just kind of like giving her the what for, and she kind of crawled down, and I could hear her just sitting off and a few feet away, and I'm just like, oh. This, of course, didn't make me feel any better. So then I just sat up. I'm like, honey, Daddy's just not feeling well. And Mommy said I needed to rest, and she asked you to leave me alone. And did you leave me alone? No. Like, okay, so I want you to understand that you have to respect some space sometimes. And so I actually stopped and I had this conversation with her to let her know why I barked at her and why I yelled at her, and allowed her to understand that the dynamic that I'm owning up to my end of it, and I apologize for speaking her in that way, but let her know the reason why I did. So I was able to speak my mind and at least help her understand what the situation was. And so that's one thing that I feel like we can always do, is that we can always go back. Granted, we can't take back the words that we say. Unfortunately, that is not something that I've figured out how to do. There is not that delete button or that rewind erase. But we can go back, and I've done this probably more as an exercise with my kids than anybody else, but I've noticed that it has helped me in the real world too when I feel like I haven't been my best, is that I'll go back and I'll just explain, okay, yeah, I apologize for reacting in this way, and this is the reason why I did, but I want you to understand your side of this, and then this is my side of it. And that's a way to, the closest thing I can come to a rewind is being able to circle back and own up to your own side of things, and give the situation a chance to kind of, I won't say necessarily be corrected, but at least change the energy of it, so that whoever, for my daughter, she was the victim of my wrath for a few moments there, but to understand that she really was just being herself, and that all I'm asking her to do is have different awareness and have some consideration, and that she's, and instead of having her carry around this, what was that all about, or not having any idea why she was being treated the way that she was, then it gives her a chance to have an understanding, so that neither one of us would then carry this thing around without really knowing or having any healing that can come from that. So that is certainly something that I'm a high advocate of, is that no matter what the situation was, that I think that you can go back and find some healing about it if you just speak your mind and own your part of it. So another time where I rose above saying what I wanted to, and this was a completely different situation. One of my sons was playing soccer and was playing for rec league, and then went to the next travel league of soccer, and was actually it was the first game of the season, and really loves soccer. He finds a lot of joy in it, and he wanted to change from the rec league to the next league because he wanted to be challenged more, and so I really appreciated that about him. And so it was the first game, and I was watching the warm-ups, and he's kind of doing what he's supposed to be doing, and I was a big soccer player when I was a kid, so I had a lot of passion about it too, and it's something that I really enjoyed and did for a good part of my life. So there was kind of this connection that was happening there, and so we went through the first game, and he did all right. He did all right for his first time out with the up leveled in the soccer and all that, and so we're talking after the game, and he's like, "Yeah, it's awesome. I'm like one of the best players out there," and I'm like, oh, in my mind, I'm like, "No, you're not," and I, this was one of those moments as a dad, as a human being, where I had a choice. I had a choice: do I speak the truth as I see it, in that, no, son, you are not one of the best players? And part of me kind of wanted to do that, just to kind of put him in his place and be like, "No, you got a lot of hard work to go." But I also noticed and realized that at this moment, this could be that pivotal point where he's either going to continue to want to go forward, or I could say, "No, you're not," and squash this joy that he has for it. And I thankfully chose the right thing and said, "You do really well." Kind of something in the middle. Wasn't necessarily saying, "Yes, you are the best," and I wasn't saying, "No, you got a lot of work to do." Just kind of saying, "Yeah, you're doing a really nice job out there." And so this is one of those times when we interact with somebody where we sometimes will have a choice, where we know what our reality of the situation is, and obviously the reality of their situation is different than ours, and so they're far ends of the spectrum sometimes. And do we deliver our interpretation? Because, hey, it could just be my interpretation, and he really could be doing better than I think, or whatever it is. But when we're so far apart sometimes, to me, compassionately interacting with one another means that we find that middle ground instead of delivering a hurt or something that can change how somebody is going to be in their life just because our sense of righteousness, And so sometimes we have to put this aside too, and this is part of being impeccable with your word, is choosing how are we going to interact with each other that benefits us all the most, and looking beyond our own self. And that was one of the things that I was talking about that gets in our way, is that sometimes we're just all about us in our own little world, that we forget to see what the bigger picture is for things. So in that instance, I'm very pleased that I chose to just find that middle ground and encourage him in a way that was neither shaming nor overly empowering or a mistruth. And so I invite you to do the same thing. My last story that I want to give, and this is kind of, it goes exactly with what I'm saying, that you can always go back. And I'm going to say that there is no time limit on that. I worked in the restaurant business for a long time, and one of the restaurants I was working at, the chef was fired. I don't know, it depends on who you asked what the situation was. And a good buddy of mine and myself were candidates to take over the role. I had been the chef in many restaurants, and my buddy had not. He'd been an assistant chef or a sous chef. And so I encouraged him to take that job. And then I was his assistant, and I just really wanted that learning to be there for him. And so we worked together for a while, and In the process of that, I was his assistant, and he would ask me questions, and part of the inherited trait that I had, my father was a manager his whole life, and so I learned management from listening to how my father would treat people and how he would give his little lessons and all that, and oftentimes it was kind of like, you got to figure it out kind of lessons, and kind of letting people just work out all there instead of giving them a little nugget, just kind of saying, no, you got to figure this out yourself. And there was a lot of those instances that happened with me and him where I had the knowledge to share with him, but I wanted him to figure out for himself because that's how I was taught so many things in my life. And as a result of not really having a cohesive relationship, our friendship kind of was rocky for a while. He ended up leaving this restaurant, and we kind of kept track of each other for a while. And as more time went on, I realized that part of my managerial style was not from the highest place. It was from a place that I had inherited, that I had learned these traits of how to interact with people, and I realized that I was operating not from my best and highest self. And so reflecting on that for a couple of years, I called him up like, hey, Dan, we need to have some coffee. And he's like, I don't know, I'm kind of busy. I'm like, hey, I'd really love to do that. So we ended up finding some time to get together, and it was a pretty tough conversation for a while, but we got down to the nitty-gritty, and I owned up to where I was at that time in my life and how I had got there, and then where I feel like I would like to be and how I wish things could have been. And of course, we couldn't go back and change that, but in having that conversation and going back and owning up to it and saying, this is really what I wish I would have said, what I meant to say, we're now good friends again, and we're able to have the great talks that we had prior to any of that happening, because he was a really dear friend to me, and served a great role in my life. And so being able to heal that situation meant a whole lot to me. And I mean, it was years later that I went back to do that, but I never regret going back. And then has allowed me for other things in my life to realize that if I wasn't my highest and best self in something, that, hey, I can still go back and I can have that conversation. So the key to this kind of learning about being impeccable with your word and kind of trying to limit these instances of what I meant to say is that we need to listen, and listening isn't just with our ears alone. Listening is with our eyes, as we are engaging with the person that we're talking to or the situation, and realizing that we need to look beyond ourselves and our immediate situation and consider what the big picture is that might be surrounding that. And to understand that there is more than our side and our position in anything. And if we can own up to that for ourselves, then we can have the conversation with the other person and maybe allow them to do the same thing. Because again, the more of an example we be of what we want to see, then the more we allow the opportunity for others to do the same. So when we can do this, we're far less likely to be reactive, and then we can respond in a compassionate and respectful manner. I'm not saying that this is going to be something that you're never going to have that moment again where I wish I would have said that. But as I said, these are all ways that you can take these tools and you can go back and you can own it for yourself. You can have some of your own growth and healing. Because when we don't do that, when we don't go back, when we don't revisit it, and we don't try to make things right, that we're denying our own virtues and our values. And we're denying the opportunity to learn and to connect and to heal. So again, there is no time limit. It is still possible to heal these old wounds. And if we don't have the opportunity to do it in person, that one of the things that I've done in the past, and I invite you to do it as well, is that you can just write a letter. And it can be a letter that you actually send, or it can just be a letter that gets it out of your own head. Because when we keep it in our own head and we don't get it out, whether speaking or writing it, somehow it stays in that loop. And that feeds, either consciously or unconsciously, is going to feed that loop of some kind of regret, some kind of time that we wish we could do something different. And those are just that just creates that negative energy in our body, whether we're conscious in it or not. So again, if you can't actually physically go and do this, or if you don't actually want to physically go and do it, write a letter. It gets it all out. It's out on paper. Then you can have a sense of letting it go. And you can mail it, or you can burn it, you can do whatever it is, but give yourself that opportunity to process something that you wish you could change so that you can move on from it. So that is what I meant to say today was this. So for you, if you find yourself stuck in that situation, work it out. All right. All right. Let us take an offering for Unity of Des Moines. We will take our tithe and love offerings in our hand as we state this affirmation of giving together. Divine love as me blesses and multiplies